On a December day in 2010, a produce vendor in Tunisia stood in front of a government office and set himself on fire, killing himself. His desperate actions helped spark a revolutionary uprising that has come to be known as the Arab Spring. While the uprising across the Middle East and North Africa did not take place during a specific calendar season, they were commonly referred to as the Arab Spring, in allusion to the so-called Prague Spring, a 1968 democratic revolution in Czechoslovakia. The Arab Spring timeline began in Tunisia, a country that had been under the allegedly corrupt and authoritarian rule of President Zain al-Abidine Ben Ali for more than 2 decades. On December 17, 2010, a working-class vendor named Mohamed Bouazizi was approached by Tunisian authorities about his unlicensed cart. He offered to pay a fine, but instead his vegetables were confiscated, and he was publicly humiliated by the police. Afterwards, to add insult to injury, local officials refused to hear his complaints of harassment. In a show of protest, Bouazizi stood in front of the local governor's office and set himself on fire. He died from his injuries on January 4th. Bouazizi became a martyr who inspired others who were suffering from unemployment at the hands of a corrupt government. His death sparked a Tunisian revolution in which protesters armed themselves not only with signs, but with cell phones, allowing the protest to spread at social media speed. On January 11th, a week after Bouazizi's death, Tunisia's government fell apart, and the disgraced president Ben Ali fled the country. The videos of the successful uprising shared via social media raised global awareness of the protests themselves. State-run news organizations were barely able to keep up. The speed and success of the protest inspired others across the region. Throughout January, protests erupted in Algeria, Jordan, and Oman. By January 25th, the movement reached Egypt, followed by Syria, Yemen, Iraq, Libya, and several other countries. On February 11th, Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak stepped down, and by the end of the year, Yemen's government was overthrown, as was Libya's, ending the dictatorship and the life of their leader, Muammar Gaddafi, who was captured and killed by Libyan rebel militia. While some of the Arab Spring protests did result in regime changes, not all of them brought about positive change for the working-class people like Mohamed Bouazizi. In some cases, the uprisings were co-opted by religious extremists like ISIS, who embraced the revolt against secular Arab regimes for their own agenda. As a result, when governments toppled in places like Syria and Iraq, rebel groups stepped in to fill the void, using strong-arm tactics and even terrorism. In Syria, civil war has resulted in the deaths of some 500,000 people, stoking the fires of unrest. Along with political instability and economic stagnation in neighboring countries, the Syrian civil war has also led to a massive refugee crisis in the region. While the Arab Spring revealed how fast a revolution fueled by technology could unfold, it also once again proved how complicated and unpredictable revolutions can be.
The wave of revolution sweeping the Arab world started in a forgotten town in the flatlands of Tunisia. It was an unlikely place for history to be made, but so was Tunisia itself. The smallest country in North Africa, strategically irrelevant, with no oil and not much of an army. It has been an oasis of tranquility in this tumultuous part of the world, famous for its beaches, its couscous, and its wonderful weather. But there was a dark side to paradise. For 23 years, Tunisia was ruled by a corrupt and ruthless dictator named Zain Ben Ali, who filled his prisons with anyone who spoke out against him. As we first told you earlier this year, Ben Ali is gone now. In January, he left the country quickly. In one of the most astonishing episodes of our time, he was overthrown by a popular uprising sparked by the desperate act of one simple man. If the Middle East is being transformed before our eyes today, it all began when a poor fruit vendor decided he just wasn't going to take it anymore.
The story will continue in a moment.
Sidi Bouzid, a town of 40,000, doesn't get so much as a mention in the Tunisian guidebooks. Tourists don't come here. On Friday morning, December 17th, 26-year-old Mohamed Bouazizi was selling fruit from a cart, as he did every day to support his family. He didn't have a license, but very few of these vendors did.
A municipal official, a woman, came by and confiscated his scale right here. It was worth $100, and Mohamed Bouazizi knew he'd have to pay a bribe to get it back. This had happened to him many times before, but this time he got mad. He complained, and the woman slapped him. One slap in the face, and that's how the revolution began.
He ran, screaming, to the government office in the center of town. He wanted his scale back. That's all, but they wouldn't let him in. He went to a gas station, filled up a canister, and went back to the government building. His friend Jamil, another fruit vendor, went with him. Jamil says Bouazizi stood in the middle of traffic, poured gas over himself, and cried out, "How do you expect me to make a living?" Then he lit a match. He barely survived. Bouazizi's mother says her son wasn't political in any way. He just wanted to continue making his $10 a day and send his sisters away to college. But that slap was one indignity too many. It was illegal to demonstrate in Tunisia, but hundreds came from all over town to protest. Nothing like that had ever happened before in Sidi Bouzid.
The symbol, by just burning himself, using his body as a way to express that anger and need for dignity, touched a lot of Tunisians.
Ziad Mahersi is a doctor and radio show host who was active in the uprising. He worked with us on our story.
Do you think this revolution would have happened now if it hadn't been for Bouazizi?
I don't think so.
The anger spread to other towns in the interior of the country, where unemployment among university graduates was approaching 50%. The dictator Ben Ali did the only thing he knew how to do. He turned to his police.
The turning point, the real one here, was the real bullets. Tunisia is one of the most peaceful countries you can ever think of. Tunisia, people don't have guns. Even robbers don't have guns. And then here we have the ruler, the government, asking its police to shoot its own people using snipers, shooting people with real bullets in their heads.
Hundreds of protesters were killed, but you wouldn't have heard anything about it on the state-run media. 20% of Tunisians, however, are on Facebook, and Facebook had pictures.
How did Facebook actually work in spreading the unrest?
Facebook was the only video sharing platform that was available to Tunisians. And seeing videos of people shot with the real bullets in their heads on Facebook was shocking to many Tunisians.
Tunisia had been a battleground before, but that was a long time ago. Look who's been here. Hannibal, Carthaginians, Romans, warriors all, and all leaving their mark. At the Kasserine Pass, the U.S. Army fought its first major battle with the Germans in the Second World War and left nearly 3,000 soldiers behind in a cemetery few Americans even know about. Until last winter, Ben Ali's Tunisia was calm. That's because the police state he created worked, as political activist Sihem Ben Sadrine discovered when she spoke out against Ben Ali and was arrested.
They put me face to the ground, and it's a very big man. And he started jumping on my neck, on my head, on my everywhere. And he was jumping on me, and I was down.
Did he want you to say something?
No. It's just a punishment. You do not have the right to say no to Ben Ali.
After her release, the police took to dumping sewage at her front door and sabotaging her car.
They cut the freins, brakes.
The brakes, yeah.
Brakes. Twice I had accident because the brakes were cut.
The repression was complemented by corruption.
That was the specialty of Ben Ali's second wife, who was 20 years his junior, and brought her extended family into the presidential palace, turning the seat of government into a mafia command post. Mustafa Kemal Nabli was once a minister in Ben Ali's cabinet, then went into exile. He's back now as the governor of Tunisia's central bank. How much money do you think the Ben Ali family took for themselves every year?
It's significant. I think it's in the billions of dollars.
The Ben Alis blanketed the country with luxury villas. They kicked people out of any other homes they liked. Investors, businessmen couldn't do anything without giving the family a piece of the action. You haven't used the word bribe.
Oh, it's worse than a bribe. I mean, it's blunt corruption.
The 74-year-old Ben Ali saw himself as president for life, and he didn't want people to recognize that he wasn't getting any younger. He dyed his hair. Mubarak had dyed hair, pure black. What is it about these dictators in the Middle East and their dyed hair?
Those dictators try to look the way they looked when they took power, so they make people forget the amount of time they spent ruling them.
Ben Ali was taken aback by the outbreak of unrest. He tried to calm people down with a PR campaign that was nothing short of grotesque. He went to a Tunis hospital with his entourage and paid a bedside visit to the fruit vendor, Mohamed Bouazizi, who was barely alive.
That picture was shocking. You could see nothing of Bouazizi. He was surrounded by band-aids like a mummy. Obviously, he was in a coma. And then you have all these politicians coming inside the room.
Bouazizi died January 4th. Word went out on Facebook to take to the streets. The message was received. On January 14th, tens of thousands brought the nation's capital, Tunis, to a halt. Now the world started paying attention. Dégage! Get out, they shouted at Ben Ali. Ziad Mahersi was there.
That was fantastic to be there on that day. I was everybody, young, poor, rich, educated, women, men. Every part of the Tunisian society was represented in that demonstration that asked Ben Ali to get out.
The protesters thought it was entirely possible that Ben Ali would order the army to fire on them, but they didn't budge. To their astonishment, it was Ben Ali who panicked. He fled the country, went to Saudi Arabia.
I think like the majority of the Tunisian people, we were in disbelief. We were like, he's gone. It was just crazy. He left in his plane and he's gone. Took us some time to realize it, I think. So, yeah, we were free then.
It was the first time an Arab dictator had been toppled by his own people. It didn't take long before the homes belonging to his extended family were torched and looted. Today, they're tourist attractions. But not for foreigners, for themselves, a testament to what they've accomplished. There used to be pictures of Ben Ali everywhere. They're gone now, well, almost. There's graffiti all over Tunis, thanking Facebook for the revolution. But more than anything else, it was the revolt of the young. And it's your generation that went and threw out this dictator.
Definitely.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm getting the impression that you're enjoying this.
So much, so much.
Today, Tunisia's small army is keeping the peace. Elections are due to be held in the fall. Meanwhile, there's something called an interim government, and the new Secretary of State for Youth and Sport is 33-year-old Slim Amamu. He was one of the protesters. Now, he's really learning about democracy.
I have everyday demonstrations in front of my office and sometimes even in my office.
You were one of the protesters,
Yeah.
and now the protesters are protesting against you.
Yeah, that's right.
Bourguiba Avenue, Tunis's Champs-Élysées, once the place to see and be seen, has become the place to speak and be heard. Everybody wants something. The unemployed want jobs. Students want everyone from the old government sent packing. The tourist industry wants to see people back on those beaches, and the West wants Tunisians to behave themselves. You know that a lot of big countries in the world are worried that it's going to get chaotic here. What do you say?
Oh, no, definitely not. This country now is just on the verge of becoming a developed one, of joining the northern part of the frontier, the Mediterranean frontier. And I can tell you, we're going to become like Portugal in a couple of years.
Think your wine will be as good as Portuguese wine?
We've been making wine for 3,000 years, so our wine is already better, I would say.
And Tunisians say they're proud to have been the pioneers of revolution in the region. This is how they reacted when they heard Mubarak was gone. Every other autocratic leader in the Middle East is quivering, and it's all because of a fruit vendor in a small town in central Tunisia.
It's like the little push you put on like a card game on it, and then the whole castle just falls apart. That little energy was from Bouazizi.
Last February, more than 1,000 people from the capital made a pilgrimage to Sidi Bouzid, the fruit vendor's home. The Caravan of Thanks, they called it. They wanted to pay tribute to the man and the unlikely town where it all began. People said they were experiencing the deepest joy of their lives. There's nothing like a revolution. But the mother of the revolution didn't come to the parade. She stayed at home, grieving for her son. Her only mementos, 2 posters on a white wall. Way out in Tunisia's hard-scrabble countryside, there's a cemetery. The Tunisian flag and a gray cement block mark Mohamed Bouazizi's resting place. It's precarious to make predictions in this part of the world, but here's one. Before long, there will be monuments honoring him all over the country.
They called it a sea of people as millions of Egyptians ended a 30-year-old rule with peaceful protests. But not much has changed since the fall of Hosni Mubarak. 6 years on, human rights organizations argue Egyptians have lost basic liberties.
Unhappy with the brief rule of the Muslim Brotherhood under President Morsi, many Egyptians welcomed President Sisi's military coup in 2013, but he has produced a rule that is far more repressive than anything that happened even under President Mubarak, who was overthrown in the brief Arab Spring.
President Sisi came to power promising security and prosperity, but since the Morsi government was removed in a military coup, the number of attacks on Egyptian security forces have spiked in the Sinai Peninsula and elsewhere. Critics say that in the garb of an anti-terror clampdown, political opponents have also been rounded up. In the years after the revolution, more than 41,000 people have been jailed by Egypt's security forces. Just in December, activists say there were 154 cases of enforced disappearances. And there's a rising number of people who are being put on Egypt's expanding terror list.
We're talking about 1,500 or more than 1,500 people. Many of them are well-known businessmen, some of them media persons. I think the crackdown will get wider, and I think what the regime is trying to do is more or less to terrorize any potential opposition that stands against it, especially among the elite, especially among famous individuals, popular individuals.
The economy too isn't doing very well. There is a shortage of foreign currency reserves and liquidity. The Egyptian currency is valued at 18 pounds against the dollar. It used to be 6 pounds in 2012. And petroleum products such as fuel and gas have gone up by up to 40%. A recent spat with Saudi Arabia over the transfer of 2 islands has been the latest incident in sharply declining ties among the 2 countries. Former diplomats say the warming of ties between Russia over Syria and Libya are a risky foreign policy shift. A lot has changed since the first chance at Tahrir Square, but many aspirations of the protesters remain unfulfilled. Osama bin Javed, Al Jazeera.